You are listening to Accents, a radio show for literature, art, and culture. I'm your host, Katerina Stoikova, and my guest today is poet and photographer Kevin Nance. Hi, Kevin, how are you?
I'm okay. Thank you for having me on the show.
I'm very excited to hear your work. A few biographical notes. Kevin Nance is a poet, photographer, and freelance arts journalist for the Lexington Herald-Leader. His book of photographs and haiku, Even If, was published this year by University of Kentucky Arts in Healthcare. His work has appeared in several literary magazines, as well as the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Chicago Tribune, and Poets and Writers magazine, where he is a contributing editor. Kevin, would you like to tell us about your new book?
Sure. This is the book right here. And it's really, in a lot of ways, I mean, it's a chapbook, but it's also the catalog for an exhibit at the University of Kentucky Hospital of the photographs and haiku. And really the exhibit is still up. It's going to still be up through the end of this month. But of course, with the coronavirus pandemic and travel restrictions, I don't think it's realistic to go see it, although, who knows what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But fortunately, you don't have to go to the hospital to see it. You can read it here, and all the pictures and all the poems that are on the walls at the hospital are here in the book.
And you were the one who took the photographs, right? That's your
right.
work as well.
Yes. The photographs, in almost every case, I think there's 1 or 2 where it didn't predate the haiku. Generally speaking, the photos came first, and then I wrote the haiku sort of in response to the photographs, although sometimes the relationship between the photograph and the poem is pretty abstract, I would say. It's not a direct relationship in every case.
Okay. I would love for you to hear poems from the book or any other work that you would like to share with us.
Okay. Well, what I will do is I'll start out with a few from the book, and then I'll read some other things as well. And actually, since we're doing it on Zoom, I'll be able to show the viewers of the Zoom broadcast the picture in question. The sequence opens with this picture. You can see that it's a picture of Lake Michigan, actually, frozen over a couple of years ago. I lived just a block from this scene when I lived in Chicago. I moved here from Chicago about a year ago. The poem, which is called Frozen, goes like this. The lake froze over my head, but I kept swimming, waiting for my chance. I'll read one more winter poem. And by the way, the sequence of the images and poems goes from winter to spring to summer to fall and back to winter. So it sort of covers an entire year. The second poem is called Winter Risa. For those of you who don't know, that's a song cycle by Schubert, and it shows a couple of birds in winter. And the text is, we stayed together that winter. In the springtime, you left me behind. The next is the first spring poem, and this is a photograph that I shot at Big Hill, Kentucky, across the lake, the valley, from my friend Linda Bryant's home in Berea, Kentucky. And it's called, if you can make it out, right in here you see redbud trees. I mean, it's mostly a winter landscape, but the redbud trees have begun to appear in the woods on the mountain. And the text goes, first blush. The mountain rises from a winter's nap and blinks, apples in its cheeks. Here we're getting into sort of late spring. In this poem, you seem to be sort of peering into some darkness, and there's some Queen Anne's lace in the foreground. The title is Orpheus, and perhaps some of our listeners and viewers will know the legend of Orpheus, who went down into Hades to retrieve his beloved, and but then something happens when he tries to bring her back from the underworld, and that's what the poem talks about. The text goes, warned not to look back at my love in hell, I looked and lost her again. I'll skip ahead to a couple that I kind of particularly like. This is one of them. This is another scene from Berea, where my friend Linda Bryant's property, where she's starting a wonderful artists and writers retreat. And this poem is called The Sailor. And it reads, I sailed the wide sea in that little bed, counting my toys, 2 by 2. This is a poem that goes with this picture of autumn leaves falling into a gutter in Chicago. And the text goes as such. The poem is called Left. The dead blaze brighter in my mind every autumn as I walk their way. This is a pretty autobiographical poem. You can see the image, and the text is, this was the year when I suddenly grew old, then young again, so young. And I'll skip to the very end of the book, and this is the title poem. You can see the image. This is from Lake Michigan again. And the poem is called Even If. Even if I die, I will have lived to see this and tell it goodbye. I thought I would read a couple of poems here from that were published in a magazine called the Cumberland Poetry Review a few years ago. And one is called, this one's called Afterward. I don't know why, but I feel like this poem speaks to our present moment in some way. And it's the poem, as I think you'll be able to tell, imagines what happened in the Garden of Eden after Adam and Eve were expelled. Afterward, with no one to call them, the animals in the garden forget their names, their truths too. In sudden hunger, they hunt each other, rending the air with screams of the kill. In garden paths once worn smooth by the tread of soft bare feet, grass grows, then saplings, erasing every trace of man or woman or God. Where once there was only spring and summer, now comes autumn. The shimmering tree at the edge of the garden, so heavy with fruit that its branches bend down to the ground. With no one to pick them, the ripened apples fall from the tree, luscious in the light, and are eaten by birds who scatter their seed in fertile fields far from the garden. High in the tree, two eyes watch. A mouth shoots out an exploratory tongue, tastes winter on the wind, and begins to invent an alphabet, starting with the letter S. This next poem, which was based on a dream I had many, many years ago as a young man, is called It. The broom sedge field at sunset is filled with boys playing hide and seek, prowling the field, not knowing who's it. Each hides in the tall, dry grass. They ignore the candles coming on in the windows, edge farther and farther toward the darkening woods. Their clothes are torn. Wisps of their hair tangle in the briars. Hand over hand, they climb the trunks of trees, nest in cradles of branches. Pale as possums, their eyes flash pink in the light of the huge moon rising. Their voices grow deep as they bay to each other over and over. Find me, find me, find me. And then the last of three poems I'll read from this group is called Finishing Touches. And obviously it has some relevance to the present moment as well, I think. Holding a hand for the last time. Your fingers linger on a wrinkle, a lifeline you'll never touch again. And you tell yourself that maybe memory is enough, just enough, if it lasts. Maybe it will last, but it won't be enough. tomorrow, oh, and years from now. It won't be this still, warm palm, this hand that took your trembling hand and held it all that night till morning. I'll finish up here with a couple of poems that I've written since the coronavirus pandemic started. This one actually doesn't have a title, at least not yet. With the news so uniformly depressing, I retreat to my kitchen and make some pinto beans with a little bacon and some fresh baked cornbread to sop up the juice, and sit down to eat with the ghost of my Aunt Addie at my elbow, clinking the ice cubes in her glass of sweet tea, waiting for me to ask the blessing. And then finally, this is a poem that I wrote, and I dated it April 7th, 2020. I think the date is maybe a little bit important, and it's called A Sonnet, Just in Case. I know I'm not supposed to write these lines about this virus. Not just yet. Too soon, too soon. They say to wait like grapes on vines for one more season, one more harvest moon. But darling, what if there's an early frost? I'll never have this chance to tell you how I loved our time together. Nothing's lost when written down this quickly, even now. So please forgive my haste to set in stone how beautiful you were that day we met. How much more beautiful you've grown each day and night since then. We're not done yet. But if you wake to find me getting gone, you'll have these words I left you, moving on.
Wow, Kevin, I love this. I found them moving, and I was able to picture everything that was said and done in them, and I lived through them. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Katerina, very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show.
I want to ask you one last question, if you wouldn't mind. You said that you moved to Kentucky or Lexington 1 year ago from Chicago. What is it like? Was it a culture shock for you?
Well, no, because I had lived here before.
Okay.
I lived in Lexington for a decade in the 80s and 90s, where that was when I was a staff writer for the Herald-Leader. And then I left the Herald-Leader after 10 years and went to a couple of other newspaper jobs. The first one was at the Tennessean in Nashville, and then I was there for 5 years or so, and then after that I moved to Chicago to take up a job for the Chicago Sun-Times. And then after that, I was a freelance writer for many years, and I still am. So coming back to Lexington was certainly no culture shock. If anything, moving to Chicago was the culture shock. I really, to be honest, I never felt entirely at home in Chicago. It might be the Southern thing. It might be, there were numerous factors, but in short, I much preferred Lexington. And when I decided to move from Chicago a little bit over a year ago now, I thought, well, where would I like to live? And it was an easy answer, which was Lexington was the place that I had felt most at home. And it's the only place in my lifetime that I've ever moved back to. So, and it's been a wonderful experience coming back and seeing my old friends here and making new ones. And it's just been a glorious experience for me to come back here.
And how has the place changed?
Well, it's bigger to some extent. I mean, there's more development. Sadly, I think we've seen, more of the horse farms that used to be so plentiful around. Many of those we've lost due to development. But I suppose you can't keep progress from happening if that's what progress is. But the essential character of Lexington, I don't feel like it's changed a whole lot, which is a wonderful thing, because to me, Lexington is a city that appreciates artists, appreciates the arts, appreciates people who are different.
Yeah.
I don't, I never felt judged here. I always felt at home here, being, in many ways different. We won't go into all the ways in which I feel different from other folks here, but there are some ways. And I always felt, welcomed, embraced even. And so coming here from Chicago, I was in Chicago for 15 years. Coming here really felt to me like coming home.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate you and your poetry and your photography, and very happy to have you back in Lexington. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.